This is the UC Hunting Properties Podcast, your home for all things recreational land. Our goal, to help you stand on your investment. Hey guys, welcome back to the UC Hunting Properties Podcast. We're going to veer off course, normal course today. My old buddy Steve Hanson drove up from beautiful southern Iowa. We're going to deep dive and try to pick our way through Steve's brain, which if you know Steve, that could be interesting.
Should be.
But Steve, welcome, man. Good to have you back on.
Oh, thanks for having me up here. Yep. Great weather you guys have up here.
It's crazy, man. Here we are, second day in July, I guess it already is, and today's high is like just over 70.
Yeah, 72. Yep.
Got more rain again overnight.
Yeah, we're not near as wet as you guys are up here. And we've had the heat down there. We've had 90 plus for quite a while, so we could use some more moisture and obviously use some cool weather.
Well, so. I'd trade you the moisture for the heat if you want to do it.
I would gladly do it. I don't think it's going to work.
Well, it's kind of weird this year because even like the food plot beans and even the egg beans, I guess I shouldn't just be talking about food plots, but I mean, it's almost like they've stalled because all the moisture is right at the top of the ground. Yeah, and they don't have to work and put roots on to get down to the nutrients.
Yep. Yeah, it's so different from when I was up here last year.
Yeah.
With you guys, it was, it had been dry, and we got some rain while we were here, and everybody was super thankful for it. So
we had, and I don't know it was one of the most severe droughts on record. And like, I mean, no different than a lot of your guys' good ground, but we depleted all the subsoil.
Sure.
I mean, there's dudes that still had record yields last year.
Right.
But it was it. So even going into the spring, I was worried because I was like, boy, if we don't catch up, this is going to be a tough year for a lot of guys. But
really tough.
Pendulum swung.
Yep.
Plumb the other
seems
way.
to always do that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Mother Nature knows how to take care of itself. But,
yep.
Steve, here's how I want to start. We've had you on before when when we started doing podcasts. You were maybe one of the first podcasts we even did. And we talked a lot about some about your background. I want you to touch on that again because I mean we definitely have more listeners now than we ever have.
Sure.
And you are kind of like legend status in Southern Iowa.
Hope that's good.
No.
Yeah.
I think it is. But give us take a little time. Give us a little bit about your background and where you grew up. What brought you to Iowa? Let's start there, Steve, and
sure.
then we're going to get into some real world specifics on what's going on today. So
absolutely, yeah. I grew up in western suburbs of Chicago, and because of that location, you could only bow hunt, so got crazy into big deer, and then saw the progression of land and the popularity of hunting changed the dynamic, and then 5 hours to the west was south central Iowa.
Yep.
I gravitated there. And it was literally like going back in time because the land hadn't gone nuts yet. And, even though I was fairly young, I was able to, put together a couple pieces of property and then, chase that. And during that time, I worked and traveled, mostly guiding. I worked in Alaska for 9 years. I was never up there over the winters, but I would be up there. Then I had a house in Ely, Minnesota, and I would guide up in Quetico in Canada in the summers.
Up in the North Country.
Yeah, so I bounced around. In my youth, I did a lot of cool stuff, but I always used those as a vehicle to save some money to buy some land.
Sure.
And then, we had a guiding business, and I'm still a minor partner in the guiding business in southern Iowa, but I've sort of transitioned more into investing in my own lands and then managing those lands, doing the CRP, doing the timber work, all that kind of stuff was based upon my own land. And then I've kind of branched out and do help some other folks with management projects as well, and it's a great complement to our real estate business because it's a seamless thing. If somebody has a farm and, we help get them into it, we can help take it to the next level. So.
Yeah, no. And Steve's part of what I consider a powerhouse brokerage.
Yep.
In Hawkeye Farm Management and Realty down there. I mean, you guys are, same thing, kind of been there a long time.
Yeah, the Ammons family is very well established in our area, and Nate and Ryan have taken the business over from their dad, Alan, who's done a great job and built a great reputation in our area. And I've been with them probably 12 years, maybe.
Right.
So yeah, it's a great fit down there.
Well, and being based out of Albia, I mean, Albia doesn't need any introduction in the deer hunting
to the big deer world for sure.
Right.
So.
No, that's super cool. Now, Steve, you mentioned Thank you, number one, because that was a very brief overview of a
Sure.
lot of cool shit you've done
Yeah,
along the way. But obviously, Iowa got you Big Deer got you gravitating towards Iowa.
Right.
Was there any single thing that you landed in the area you landed, or you just wanted to be Southern Iowa? I mean, like, what was the
way I ended up in the exact location, where I started Appaloosa, Monroe counties down there, is I was guiding up in Canada, going through customs, and a guy in front of me had a jacket that said Iowa, Missouri bow hunting.
Okay.
And I just struck up a conversation with him in the line going through customs, and turns out he was an outfitter in Missouri and wanting to start he had just started in Iowa. I think that would have been 91, which was the first year that they allowed non-resident hunting in Iowa.
Sure.
And I got to know him a little bit. And,
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
91 was the first year?
I think. It would have been 90 or 91.
Give or take,
it would have been one of those was the first seasons. And then, he invited me to come on down, and I helped him out at his Missouri place. And then he got a huge kind of a one-off, unbelievable Iowa farm and started guiding, and I started working for him. And then through that meeting, it was, think of this. I mean, this is amazing. That farm at the time, this would have been early 90s, that farm was a little over 3,000 acres, had tried to become a development at one time. So it had a 400-acre private lake in the middle of it.
Oh, wow.
So it was 3,000 acres with a 400-acre private lake. And I'll never forget, the landowner of that place was a big name in Iowa road construction. This was just one of his investments. And he offered it to the guy I worked for. I sat in the truck with him while they discussed it. And he said, I'd really like to have $1 million for this place, but we'd probably take $900,000, which would have been a little under $300 an acre with a lake, and then
it's hard to even think about that.
It really is hard to think about that.
I mean, the things went 10 to 20 fold.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, like you said, if you had a crystal ball, which I've always said I sort of did because I saw it happen in Illinois.
Yeah.
So I saw this same low quality, marginal farmland. I saw it go from $1,500 an acre to $3,000 an acre when you could go to our part of Iowa and still buy it for $500 to $700 an acre. So to me, it made sense the whole time, but that's only because I'd seen it happen already. So.
Yeah, that's cool perspective. I mean, I know you're buddies with Skip Sly.
Mm-hmm.
As am I, and actually Skip's going to come on and we're going to do an episode with
that'd
Skip.
Be awesome.
And yeah, I mean, he's such a knowledgeable dude. But
yep.
It just blows my mind because, to your point, there is no crystal ball, but certainly there are guys. Skip would be another one that I'd throw out there that inevitably kind of did have a crystal ball or at least an insight.
Yeah. Yep.
Hey, this is probably going to happen. And heck, I think you could argue now that there's even maybe a shift to some degree into areas of Kansas where, large tracts can still be gobbled up for what seems very reasonable.
Yep. And at least there are large tracts. In our part of Iowa, it's getting very difficult to find 1,000+ acre tracts. There's just so few of them, that really is an anomaly. So.
Well, and I think people that aren't familiar with Iowa, I mean, I think everyone thinks of Iowa. I mean, in the hunting world, you think of big deer.
Right.
But I think the rest of the world would look at Iowa and go, well, it's cornfields, it's soybeans,
right.
it's pigs, whatever. Right. And they're not wrong.
Right. That's our economy for sure.
That is our economy. And with that comes kind of the generational farm story. And we see it a lot up here in the northeast corner. You guys obviously have seen a ton of it in the south, but it's the progression, I guess,
sure.
right? Where, whether it's great grandpa or grandpa put the farm together.
Right.
And at that point, it was an operating farm. That's how they made their living, right?
Right. That's the whole deal.
Yeah. I don't want to say everyone had a couple hundred acres, but in a sense they did.
Yep. Yeah. A family that had livestock and farmed a little bit, they could live 20 years ago on 240 acres.
You got
and
it.
Maybe rent a little bit or do a little bit of custom work, but that's what people's lives were.
And that's where I'm saying, it's interesting to watch it because, now you skip from, I'm just saying grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
Now the son stayed home and was involved in the farm. And I think from what I gathered, that's where some farmers went throttle down.
Right.
And 200 turned into 500,
sure.
600 or 1,000. And other farms kind of went the other way or stayed the same.
Right.
And now they get into generation 3.
Right.
A lot of those people aren't here.
No, they're not here and they don't have the interest in it like they did.
Correct. So, I mean, inevitably, they're sitting on a gold mine of sorts.
Of wealth. Yep.
But with that, a lot of these farms have just got chopped up, right? 200 acres is now an 80 and a 120, or a 40 and an 80, or whatever.
You know, and one of the trends that speaks to what you said exactly is, you know, we do our office, a couple of the agents, Luke in particular, specializes in auctions.
Yep.
And we'll go up and help with his auctions and stuff sometimes. And it's amazing. It's almost like every auction is the same. Mm-hmm. The final parent passed away, 2 or 3 siblings. Now they've got their stepped up basis. So how fast can you sell this and convert it to cash? And it's really kind of sad, you know.
It is.
Because we always take the family or whatever, whoever's there on behalf of the sellers, out to lunch afterwards. And I'm like, they're walking away with a big check, but you realize, holy cow, what did that family have to endure for 50 plus years, 70 plus years to make today happen? You know what I mean? And that part of it's kind of sad. So
it is. And I mean, it's cool because there is still a lot of, tradition or heritage in Iowa, and there's a lot of century farms.
Sure.
But certainly as time goes,
right, there's going to be less.
Because there's just plumb less farmers, right? The ones that stood the test of time are getting bigger.
Right. Yeah, they're either big or they're gone. Yep.
Yeah. So good, bad, or indifferent. I mean,
it is what it is.
It's the Iowa anomaly, I think. But even the agriculture aside, the rec side in Iowa, obviously you've got to see that thing go from, basically what people would consider junk land.
Literally junk.
To now, hell, I'd argue it'll hold its own with just about anything.
Yeah, I mean it rivals, B quality cropland almost down in our area, which is crazy. And there's been a lot of factors that have helped that, once you've diversified your pool of owners to the point where they're from other areas, then the farm economy doesn't sway the values near as much. Yep, because of that. Maybe it'll slow. When we have a slow time, it just slows how many sales there are, but you don't see it. It's not going to be like the 80s again.
Right.
That's for sure.
Well, and there's very few things that are really going to deter what, I'm just going to say mid 80 to 90 CSR ground. Like, guys know what that'll produce, and they're playing the long game, and that's why we see the crazy prices. But rec farms are a little different because, I mean, even as I think about it, just, you take an aerial map. See, we were kind of talking about this, but not all farms are created equal. No. I don't care what part of Iowa we're in. But when you look at it, and, I always use the term island effect.
Sure.
But if you are the, 80, 90 acre block of timber.
Yeah, or 200, whatever. I mean, as big as it could be, but if you're isolated.
If you're isolated and basically wrapped in big ag, and you have this island of sorts,
the Mecca,
you really have something special.
Yep.
And down in your neck of the woods and up here, of course, that's hard.
It's very hard.
Because there's a lot of structure hooking stuff together.
A lot of connective cover, and that is, and that's one thing I've noticed too, that, I know nowadays buyers are a lot more knowledgeable. Like
more educated.
Access is a big deal. If you have access from 2 or 3 sides for different winds, that farm's going to be quite a bit more valuable than one that has a one-sided access. It's only going to hunt good on a south wind, or whatever.
Well, it's the old saying, right? Your farm's only as good as your neighbor's.
Sure.
And in a sense, especially with some farms, I think that's 100% accurate.
Yeah. Yep. And we have the same dilemma down there, and that's the interesting part about southern Iowa with the amount of non-resident landowners, because overall, I would say they're a better, I hate to say quality neighbor, but they're, as far as the resource is concerned, they take less from the resource than maybe some of our Iowa resident neighbors would. And that's one of the things as they change laws and stuff. I don't know if they're giving that much consideration that, the non-resident trend, while a lot of people don't like it, there are some positives to it. They're usually very good stewards of the land too.
Well, and you'll have a better insight on this too, Steve, because I feel like we have less like non-resident absentee landowners up here.
Okay. Yep.
And not that we don't have some. Don't get me wrong. There's guys that are buying land up here for deer, basically, and that's it. They're parking money.
Right.
But certainly, southern Iowa in general gets more of that spotlight.
Oh, yeah.
And for all the right reasons.
Sure.
I mean, but where I was going to go with that, Steve, is it is interesting because it does seem like non-residents always kind of get the brunt of, all things negative.
Yep.
And I guess my experience has been almost the plumb opposite where
I would agree with you.
A lot of these guys are just tore up and big deer's their passion.
Yep.
And like their lifelong goal was to own a farm in Iowa.
Yep.
And shit, they might not step foot on the place other than 10 days a year.
Right. Or they, if you looked at the amount of capital contributed to our economy and then used the metric of how many bucks are killed per dollar, your non-resident landowner is going to be the highest output of money and the lowest, what they're drawing from the resource most of the time. Now,
and I don't want to rip on the farming community, but I mean, as a general rule, a big farmer cares about one thing, and that's crops, making money. And not that they hate deer. I hate saying that, but like jokingly, they want the deer dead and they want less trees. They want more rows of corn.
Yep. Yeah. And that those two landowner groups, whether it's a resident hunter, deer hunter, landowner, or non-resident, the farmer groups and them definitely butt heads. You know what I mean? Even down in our area, where we're not as, we seem to have a lot of marginal, compared on a statewide level, we would have more marginal farmland in the areas that have high quality hunting, but you still have that that battle, and it is interesting just to see how all that plays out. So.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, and I love going down to southern Iowa because it's there are areas that's like, going back in time. I feel the same way about Elmakey County up here. Very rough and timber, and a lot of guys would just say they're cattle farms, right? They're
old
pasture
school.
farms.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think we look at them and go, oh, no, that's a crown jewel hunting farm.
I would think so. And your country up here is beautiful. It's like you guys are lucky for that.
We are
It's
lucky.
definitely the prettiest part of the state. So
kudos. Yeah. We'd welcome you up here.
Yeah, I might have to stick around more. I like
retirement
it up here.
plan.
Yeah.
Beware big deer. Steve Hanson.
Yeah.
Steve Hanson's in town. No.
I like the access to all the fishing you have. That's
cool.
That's
trout
something
fishing.
We don't. The trout and the Mississippi. I mean,
did you bring
guys,
your rod up for today?
No, I knew it was kind of flooded up.
I was going to say it would suck all the.
When I talked to Tyler, that's what he said. He's like, I don't know, dude.
We need to plan that though.
I'm available anytime.
That'd be fun. Float the river, catch some trout. No, that'd be good stuff. So. Steve, you brought. I mean, we're kind of on the topic. I want to go there with you because I know you're number one. Steve's been very involved with. I don't want to say a lobbying effort, but a legislative effort.
Yep.
With the guys that are doing the Iowa Sportsman's Club, and I know you've been to the Capitol with Skip.
Yep.
To bring some different perspective. But let's go there.
Sure.
Let's go there a little because I do feel like. With that group, and I shouldn't just say even that group, it's now the members and the awareness has been very raised in Iowa, and the one stat that gets thrown around a lot is that, as of today, there's only 7 or 8% of the entire state
is timber.
Yes,
or considered forested. Yep.
Which is teeny tiny.
It's tiny, and the number being tiny is shocking. The fact that it's dropping fairly precipitously is even worse. You know what I mean? Because it's not like, it's 8%. It's always been 8%. It's 8%. And it used to be 12%.
Yep.
So that's, then that is a trend that hopefully, that's one, and that's one of the things as we talk about non-residents, them adding value to the resource of the hunting land will help stop that.
Yep.
Because if it doesn't have any value, it'll just keep getting cleared. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, that I always like to throw that in when people are talking about, hey, they're, about the non-residents or the draw. It's like there are a few good things about it too.
Right.
And that would be one of them.
I mean, I think there's more than a few, and I'm not. I guess I don't want to take sides. I feel like we're pretty spoiled being Iowa residents,
right?
And pretty well insulated. Whatever. We have our own farms. We're doing our thing, right? But in the same, I think there's a lot of areas of the country where, we are plumb oblivious to how potentially poor the hunting is. And when it's your passion, it's your passion.
Right.
On that note, Steve, so the big reg change, obviously, that everyone's, freaking out about kind of is that Iowa has now officially banned non-resident party hunting.
Correct.
And I want to explain that because I don't think a lot of people even understand the concept of party hunting.
Sure.
But in Iowa, and jump in, Steve, if I'm saying something wrong.
I can explain it if you want.
Fire away.
Yeah, because here, basically what we have for our draw in Iowa is there's 6,500 what they call either sex tags, which would be a buck tag to everybody else that you could draw for during the draw. In addition, if you're a non-resident, in addition to that, there was 4,000 doe tags for non-residents allocated by county. So a county with more deer gets more tags.
Yep.
So a person in...
And before you go forward, I want to touch on that so that a listener would understand. In the state of Iowa, you basically have, what I would consider the eastern side, so let's just call it the Mississippi
corridor.
Yep. And I don't know. I mean, I think you could say that spans out 30 to 40 miles from the river in most areas.
Yep.
You'd have pretty quality hunting, up and down the eastern side of the state. And then I would call the bottom third, southern third of the state all the way across pretty prime habitat or deer hunting.
Yep, I would say exactly.
The rest of the state, by and large, although there's pockets, and I think there's been a booner shot in every county in Iowa, which isn't real shocking. But the rest of the state are, let's call it 7/8 of the state, or whatever, literally is pretty flat as a pancake and
not much cover.
Pretty much tilled.
Yep.
Yeah. Cornfields.
And there's counties in Iowa that don't issue doe tags.
At all.
Right, at all. And they've had to, even during first gun season, I don't think you can use your either sex tag as a doe tag in certain counties. Yeah, so, that's the anomaly of Iowa. There's areas that have tons of deer, tons of habitat, and areas that have very little. So it's sometimes tough to speak generally about the whole state because of that. Because
I don't think you can anymore.
Right,
I think they're basically in crisis mode in western Iowa right now because their deer numbers are decimated.
Way down.
Yeah. Sorry, back to party hunting, Steve.
No, so no problem. So you have your 4,000 up to 4,000 non-resident doe tags allocated by county. So if there's an individual that wants to hunt Monroe County and has a friend who can get a statewide first or second gun season tag, that non-resident can buy a doe tag for that county and sit with someone who's a resident, and it's 100% legal for that person to then shoot a buck, and the resident hunter tags or the host person tags that. What they've done is they've made non-residents, it's illegal for a non-resident to party hunt. So they're completely out of that system now. But if you think back to the original math of what I was saying, there's 6,500, tags to draw and 4,000. So that's 40% of the up to 40% of people that were hunting bucks in Iowa now
Let's call it half.
Yeah, now don't have a tag.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it's a bigger issue than I think a lot of people would have thought. It was sort of a legal loophole, for lack of a better word, and they did fix it. I think they did a good thing because it was abused. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? We have a lot of our landowner friends that always party hunted. The tenants on their farm would go out there and sit with them, and that worked out fine. And I didn't feel that was abusing the intention of the law. But what I did notice after this law changed, I got a ton of calls from other outfitters, and they were freaking out. Like, how are we going to do business? I'm like, this is how you were doing business? I'm like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Like, this was not set up for a business.
And I think
what I mean? And
there's story after story after story of, to your point, people maybe taking that gray area
too far,
a little too far, or maybe way too far. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, that loophole just got closed, and I guess that was going to be my follow-up. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that affects outfitters in the state of Iowa in general.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to call anyone out on this, but if this affects you greatly, you didn't have a very good business model.
Right.
Because you should have had the business model to work off the draw system and trying to develop a reputation where you have, a pool of applicants moving forward each year.
Yeah.
And obviously that's easier for me to say because we've been in it for 25 years, but they're also, when someone comes to Iowa, their tag's pretty valuable, and they need to be working with someone who's, in it for the long haul, in my opinion.
Yep.
But yeah, it really did change. And then, speaking about the non-resident landowners, I probably had half-hour-long conversations or longer with maybe 30 landowners that we work with within a couple weeks of that law changed,
Yeah.
and went from everywhere from I'm going to sell on the extreme side to most are going to stay the course and see what's happening.
See what shakes out.
Yeah. Yep. I know a few are probably or more motivated to sell. Most are going to. What I think will get more people more non-resident landowners to sell, unfortunately, is if because of this influx of people that have to put in for the draw tags, if the gun tags go from 1 point to get a gun tag up to 3 or 4. Well, now they're like, I can't even gun hunt my own farm once every 4 or 5 years. And another unintended consequence of this that I hope that the Iowa legislature, if it gets brought up during our session this year, at least understands. Some of my landowners utilize this party hunting exemption or loophole solely to harvest does. Mm-hmm. Because they realized, hey, I own 500 acres here in Iowa. I am a detriment to my neighbor farmers.
Yeah.
So we got to do something about it. So someone like myself, it's a farm we manage. I could go buy 10, 15 doe tags, go right out and hunt with them. They buy their 1 tag. I would have 10 tags. At the end of the night,
and it's perfectly legal.
It's perfectly legal, and they were utilizing that method to try to manage the herd.
To truly manage.
Truly manage, and it's like, and now they've taken that away from them. So it's like, on the surface, you have a hard time complaining that the non-residents aren't managing their land if you give them no legal tools to do it. So, I'm hoping that gets addressed this coming legislative session.
It'll be interesting. I mean, I've thought pretty deep and hard about this whole thing, and I do think in the grand scheme of things, this probably does swing the pendulum back to keep Iowa great or whatever.
Absolutely.
And only because for purely selfish reasons, I feel like we've seen a decline.
Oh yeah.
And don't get me wrong, we still have probably the best.
Oh,
hunting.
Absolutely.
But I also remember, Steve, I'm 43, so when I got tore up with hunting, it would have been, late 90s.
Sure.
And obviously the disease has got worse.
Right.
But this is before, true management and food plots.
Right. And really, very rudimentary trail cameras.
If any.
Yep.
I remember running to Walmart and getting, film 1 hour developed.
We all do, standing there waiting.
Yeah, you couldn't wait.
Yep.
And then only to find out you had a weed doing this in front of your camera.
Your 36 pictures
you're
were
just
gone.
Pissed off. But it is interesting. The game's evolved quick.
Yes.
And I think hunters have got more effective as a whole. And when we target a deer, I don't want to say it's a guarantee.
Right.
But I'm almost to the point now where, the hardest part is having a deer.
Yes. It's much harder to grow them than kill them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know. That's what I wanted. I guess that's what I really wanted to deep dive into and get your perspective on, Steve. We all hear, there's less hunters, and now with this reg change, you could argue there's going to be less hunters.
Right.
But with that, what do you think the driving force is on? 20 years ago, it was nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Right.
During shotgun season, every group was killing booners consistently.
Yeah, they'd have a couple spikes and a booner.
Yeah.
And
and they'd kill everything.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, the herd dynamic has changed virtually everywhere. That's I would say not arguable. Even if you bring Skip on here, who probably has one of the nicest farms in Iowa, so he's a little bit insulated from it, but still he speaks to enough people and owns enough other properties. He can see the change too. There's a lot of different areas. Deer are easier to kill now than ever before due to a lot of reasons. And the other thing that I think's going on, I think, if I go back to the early 2000s, I think a lot of those big deer that we were killing were old.
Oh,
I think they were 6, 7, 8, and now it seems like everybody's, they get to 5. It's a shooter. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the difference why you don't get some of those super big, 220, 240 deer like Iowa was known to produce.
Right.
You just don't get as many of them because they may not get that big until they're, in their upper age.
Yeah, they might have been 180, 185. Which is a giant on anyone's, if you don't think that's a giant, you're crazy.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know how many guys, truthfully, can even pass a 160.
Right.
And that deer might only be 3.
Yep. And another deer that taught me that was kind of interesting because people that follow Bill Winke would know it. he bought my farm, and then I still had some of the land leased next to it.
Okay.
And that landowner didn't want to transfer it to Bill for some reason, so we kept it, and we got along. We always get along great with Bill. I'm going to go see his farm here with him this afternoon.
Nice.
Yeah. So, but Bill had a buck called Bubba. We called him Sticker 8 because he had sticker. He was a mainframe 8, and at 5 years old, he was probably mid 150s. Mm-hmm. Some people may even call that a cull buck.
Sure.
And then he got to be 6, and he got considerably bigger. And I think Bill had a shot at him that year, and he didn't get him. And then it was the next year, and then eventually it became 2012, which was our EHD year, and that buck disappeared. And that was Bill's number 1 target buck. And he had called and asked, hey, can I walk those creek bottoms off of my old farm onto the part that I leased? I said, yeah, definitely. And he found him right away. And he was like 206. But we figured it out through that. He was 9 years old.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And he was one at 5 that people could have said, wow, that's a cull buck, or just a nice mature 8. Let's shoot him, And
so on that, I'm kind of even intrigued, Steve, because I mean, and I'm no pro deer manager,
right.
But I mean, I've always kind of been of the mindset, like if a deer gets to, I'm going to say in most cases 3, but I'll go 4.
Yep.
And he's a mainframe 8.
Right.
I don't care if he's 120 or if he's 150.
Sure. Right.
He's probably going to be an 8. He might throw junk or whatever. So like that deer, did he ever?
He still kept his mainframe 8. He just added tons of abnormal.
Just went crazy.
Big splits, big like muley forks.
Yeah.
So he never did change, his main frame. He would have still been an 8, but just had tons abnormal and unbelievable mass.
Right.
That's what he put on in his later part in his life, was just crazy, crazy math. So.
But you know what I mean? Like a lot of people, in essence, cull 8s,
right.
The second they think they're 4 years old and it's a mainframe 8, it's hitting the dirt.
Right. And and I mean, I guess if you're, like we're a little bit different. If you're in an environment like Texas, where you're sort of artificially maintaining a deer herd with food, you're having to literally feed them. Then, you've got to make a decision that, okay, there can only be so many deer on the landscape.
Yep.
So then, here, because they're wild deer and they do move around, unless you have one that you think, okay, this thing's just running everybody off my farm, then there might be some incentive to do that. But otherwise, I would usually just try to let them go. Now, the one trait that I would say identifies a cull buck fairly early in life to me is short beams.
Yeah.
They have real short beams. They're never going to be very big. They just can't be. You know what I mean?
And you could almost even say that about brow tines. I mean, if they have like no brow tine or a 1-inch brow tine.
Yeah, that trait usually sticks with them.
Yep.
So, but I know the shorter beam one. I know if we get an 8-pointer and we want to, have a couple deer on our cull buck list or something, 4 or 5, and it's only got 18-inch beams and short tines, that's always going to be a good candidate for that.
How do you – I'm glad we're on this because I'm going to learn something today,
sure.
Steve. So how do you – so backing up to come forward, right? We all attempt to have some level of ability to field judge a deer, and especially with you with an outfitter background, sure. I'm sure you've been with lots of guys that are like, is that the right one, Steve? And you're like, yeah, it is, or no, it isn't, right? For whatever reason. But to truly judge a deer on the hoof, I think the 2 elements that are the hardest to truly peg would be, I would probably go beam length, I'd go mass first.
Yep.
I think it's very hard to look at a deer and go, oh, he's got 36 inches or, 40 sure. Or if he's crazy, that's simple.
Right.
But like, I'm just saying, standard look, mass would probably be my number one thing. And I do think it's hard to judge beams simply because they kind of come in all different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, like a real round-shaped rack's going to have much longer beams.
Correct.
Than one that, like that kind of comes out in a way. That one's obviously got long beams.
And you see some that come around and then hook up hard.
And that's going to add a lot more beam length to it as well.
Do you have a hard and fast rule when you're looking at a deer?
No, mass is the first one. Yeah. Like if it's got really good mass, it has age. Now, whether that means it's 5 or 6, I don't think you're going to be able to tell. But
sure.
The other thing that really skews people in Iowa, because a lot of other than early muzzleloader, all of our gun hunts are post-rut, and those deer are run down. I think that skews a lot of people because they see the smaller body at that point compared to the rut with a bigger rack, which a lot of times makes them look bigger. So
yeah,
you really have
Texas effect.
Yes,
whatever.
the Texas effect, exactly. So you really do have to be conscious of that and say, hey, I really want to look at, see what we're doing here. But mass would be the biggest one. If they don't have mass, everything else you won't be what you think it is. So
yeah, and I even think back through time. I mean, I hunted a deer. This is probably, I'm going to say 10 years ago. And I had a ton of history with this deer, where I'm not going to sit here and say I could, unequivocally guarantee you he was 7.5 years old, but like I would unequivocally guarantee you he was 6 or 7. Right. And that deer, old pot belly, sway back, everything you're looking for, Steve. And he had super long tines. He was a mainframe 10.
Okay.
But his entire life, he was like spindly.
Huh.
Even when he was, I mean, like I can show you pictures and you're like, that is if I held my hand over the
body and
or vice
over
versa.
The rack, you'd say he's mature.
Either or. And that's the only one by and large, I'm with you on, as they mature, it seems like the one thing that's consistent is they get super heavy.
They get the mass, at least, in the base and in the first, the first 2 quarters of their score. An old deer should have big bases.
Agreed. Yeah, you're 4+ inches at least on the bases. At least. Okay, so deer walks in the field, Steve, putting you on the spot a little bit. And I'm always kind of like, yes, he's mature, or no, he's not mature. Like that's the first thing that's going through my mind. If you had to field judge a deer and you have 30 seconds.
It'd be mass and beams.
You're looking at the mass and
beams.
Mass
and beams for sure.
So, okay.
And if one of those isn't there, then it's not a shooter.
And is there like a particular, are you trying to get them beams to, I'm making this up, 21 inches?
I would want longer than that.
Yeah.
I would say, you're shooting for something with 24-inch beams or bigger. A lot of what you think is 24 is going to be 23.5, and that's fine. But that's a beam length that's starting to get out there into that quality. Now it is a little rare for us to hunt where we have a lot of surprise deer because obviously with the technology anymore, most, but you still get a few surprises. Which one thing that was funny about that is just a perfect example of that last year. Jake Hofer and Jake had an Iowa tag, and we had an early cold snap in October, a good cold snap, and
damn good.
Yeah, and he agreed to. He's like, hey, I'm going to drive out there, and he brought his wife. She hung around at the lodge with Stacy, and him and I went hunting. It was the first time. It was a new farm that I bought, Decatur County Farm, so I didn't know anything about it. And all the ones that we knew were, mature or looked by their pictures were on one end of the farm. And I said, I'm just going to carry a stand in, hang it, and hunt. And I ended up having a buck come out right at dark. Great mass, tall, kind of heart-shaped rack. And I was like, that's a pretty big deer. And he's like 21 yards,
Yeah.
And I was like, I wonder what that is. And the part I missed in my story is while I was elk hunting, a friend of mine went out there to put batteries in cameras for me. Well, he inadvertently turned one of our Exodus cameras so it was not sending the pictures.
Oh, great.
So like dummies, Jake and I assumed, there's no bucks on that end of the farm, but the food plot looked great and there's a bunch of scrapes. So I go, I'm just going to hang a stand there.
See what's going on.
That thing rolled in and just, had the tank body. It was early season. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And Jake passed mid-130s or something that night, so he was happy. And so we're driving back, and I told him, I said, man, something about that when I saw that buck right away just told me that's a shooter. Grab your bow. But I'm not that anxious just to kill a deer. You know what I mean? And the whole point of us being down there was more to get him on one.
You were kind of on a recon mission.
Yeah, exactly what I was. It was like, there's too much good sign here, and that's what we determined the camera problem was. But ironically, that's the buck Jake killed.
No doubt.
Yeah, he killed that a month later. That same exact buck.
Same spot?
He was only about 200 yards away. So he was just like in a little rut funnel on another food plot, and I was on a real small green plot. I was on a northwest wind spot, and he killed him more out of a southwest wind spot. But,
sure.
But once we got to looking at it, it was like, okay, this was mature. And that was kind of a good gut check for me. Like, all right, something told me to shoot that one. I'm super glad I didn't because it worked out great for him. And with him only having a tag every 5 years, that's huge, But
well, and it's interesting too because I mean, I get it, and we're, like I said, I'll say it again, we're spoiled.
I was just going to say that word. We're very spoiled.
When we kind of, I don't want to say we make light of like a 150, but
right.
I think back, like, never in history of any of the crew I run with or grew up with or hunt with, never in history have I heard somebody brag about how many Pope and Young deer they killed.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah, no.
Booners,
that's a different story.
Yeah.
You're getting in a different caliber there.
Right.
But
how spoiled are we that, like, to your point, a 160 comes out, Steve, 100% you could have wrecked him.
Yeah, on my own farm.
Yeah, on your own farm, which is even cooler.
Right. On a stand I carried into my back and hung in a little walnut tree about 6 inches in diameter.
Oh, funny. Well, at least it was a walnut tree.
Yeah.
They're nice and hard.
Yes.
No, I'm sitting here thinking about that. But, I mean, it's that's cool that Jake got it, number one, because I know he was ecstatic about it. But
and it was his biggest deer.
That's super
and,
cool.
And that's where I'm at with, with hunting for myself and stuff. I would just assume, not shoot them, find their sheds.
Yeah.
I passed another really nice one.
Well, you can't find their sheds or your wife will kick your ass.
Yes, exactly. That's only on the home farm. We leave the home farm for her. So
that's funny.
It is pretty funny because I did take her, ironically, down to that Decatur County farm, and we didn't have the deer down there shed real late this year. They held their antlers super late.
It's such an easy year.
Yeah. But she was finding them at home, and she was like, "Why did you buy this farm?" She's like, "We don't find anything here." I'm like, "Well, it'll work out."
Oh yeah. Give it a little time.
Yep.
This will all make sense.
But
Steve, you have, and I'm gonna kind of
switch
gears. All this stuff connects, but you're such a resource to the rest of the UC Hunting Properties Network because of your experience.
Sure.
I want to talk about that a little bit because I think your business model is interesting. I mean, very interesting. Your background, obviously, very diverse in the guiding and outfitting. Certainly complements that. But I also think you've taken in my opinion, like, dude, a pro route on how you service your clients, your understanding of programs and how to assist them. And, I don't want to say extracting every dollar they can on their farm, but like.
Right, managing it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I want to talk about that a little bit because I don't think I think it's unique, Steve, or what you're doing is unique to maybe our space.
Yep.
But I don't think it's unique in the fact that I do think it's replicatable almost anywhere.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And I want to walk through that. So, like, I'm going to tee this up this way, Steve. You have a lot of clients that are long-term. You've done...
Correct. Yeah, 20-plus years.
20-plus years in the game.
Some have owned 15 different farms or more.
Exactly. Yep. So, like, in a sense, you're almost like a financial consultant to these guys because you're...
I have one... And part of the reason I have that is I like to think that I've always tried to work on their behalf.
Yeah.
This is very unique. I have one real estate client who I can sell his farms without his signature. He doesn't like to be bothered with closings. So formed an LLC, put me on it as manager.
No shit.
One of my duties is all signature authority. So, like, it's the weirdest thing when I'm the agent and then the attorney representing the buyer for selling something. It's like, why did the agent, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we have to produce all these documents, but, and that guy will buy farms without seeing them. Like, if I say, hey, man, this is a good deal, it's done, you know, he'll buy it. But and we've got along great for a lot of years. It's been a great fun working with him.
Well, that's a pretty cool, I mean, the level of trust it takes.
Right.
It's all on your back, Steve. So if you're recommending he buys, you're recommending when he sells.
Right.
I don't want to say you're his cash lever, but I mean, in a sense you are.
Yeah. Yep. And he works in the financial industry where he's trusted with lots and way more financial resources to make the decision. So I think it's easier for him to delegate some of his investments out here to me. So
probably almost has to.
He has to. Yeah. He wouldn't be functional. He wouldn't be able to function that way. And I would say there's another 20 plus clients that I do all of their FSA stuff, have power of attorney for all new programs, signing them up for stuff, managing the farm on that way.
True management.
Yeah. So they don't have to, if I see an opportunity, a lot of times, like whether it's an EQIP contract, which is just another pool of funding that benefits habitat, they may get what they call slippage funds because somebody was picked for it and then put the money back.
Yep.
That money's available, but they got to reallocate it right away.
Yep.
Well, if I can go in and sign everything that's needed that day it's done, instead of them sending it off, waiting for signatures. Or
and at that point, it's your money, or the landowner's
money.
It's
the landowner's money, right?
It, yeah.
And I'll just say, hey, I know you wanted to do this, this, and this, but this money will fund 3 of those 4 things. So let's go for it, and let's reprioritize. So
make it make sense.
Yeah, but I really like that part of it, and one of the crucial parts of that, and where I can bring the most value to someone, is starting at the beginning.
Yeah.
If he says, hey, I think we need another farm, I'm going to go out and start looking and be involved from the purchase price. Because obviously, if this is our end goal, we got to get it bought at the right price, and it's got to have the right, it's got to have the right bones to get us to where we want to go.
Yeah.
And some of those bones are simple, and people won't think about it. Some of that stuff is just like crop history. If a farm has a huge amount of crop history, we have all the options open. We can do CRP, we can do equip. If it's cattle pasture and we have to break it out of pasture, farm it for 5 years
to get that history.
To get the history, then that's a much longer timeline. So, but that's...
Talk to us about, I love that term, the bones, right?
Right.
It's the backbone of the farm or whatever, but when you're looking at that, Steve, I mean, it's easy for us to sit here and rattle off things like equip and CSP and CRP.
Yep.
But I want to dive a little further into that.
Sure.
I mean, whether it's you're working with a buyer or you're working with one of your existing clients, and they're like, Steve, get me more.
Right.
Walk us through. I mean, let's talk about those bones a little more in depth, Steve. I mean, step by step, what are you actually looking for? I mean, price aside.
Yeah, price aside. Again, taking that out of the equation. I mean, number one, we want a place that we have the ability to make it better than anything else around it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? If we're going to have to run right up against someone else who's 10 years ahead of us on habitat work, you would think it would be a benefit, but sometimes it's not, because they've already created that mecca or that island, and now we would almost be sort of like a parasite, if you will, onto that. I would rather go into an area with very little of that kind of competition. Normally we have farmer neighbors, which is great because, they've got cows. They don't have shooting houses all around us and stuff like that. So finding, something that can be what we want it to be is number one. And then number two, something that has good access. If you're really going to fight access on a lot of, like if you've got, say your farm only comes out to a road on the west side. Well, we get predominantly west winds a lot of time in the fall. You're going to be walking everywhere in with the wind at your back. You're just good. That's a challenge. Now, sometimes that can be fixed by, leasing, working with neighbors, but it's not as slick as going in and doing that. And then
not every farm the access comes in the southeast corner.
No, exactly. Yeah. And that's the whole thing. And then the other thing is too, if the farm has the basic bones of what we want, but has some significant access challenges, meaning internally to the farm, like, creek crossings that need to be improved, culverts, road systems, stuff like that. Then another thing we look for, is there timber, like some timber value? Because if there is, we will take that timber out early in the process, use those funds to fund all the other improvements. And as far as access, and usually what we try to do is when we start by do all your logistics first, your access,
your plan,
your creek crossings. People, it drives me crazy, but like people call, oh, can you plant this food plot? Yeah, well, they want you to, they think we must have a helicopter because there's no creek crossings, there's no trails,
no
you know what I
get
mean?
In there, right?
Yeah, the mirrors are getting ripped off our tractors, it's like, so now when we get one, we make the entrances, we make everything wide, we put new gates in, start with the basics. They're not the fun things,
right?
And then another thing that's a big deal on a decent sized farm is if you have enough time in your due diligence period, pull a couple soil samples.
Absolutely.
Because if the fertility's that bad, not only is it going to take a lot of money to get it back, it's going to take a lot of time. And my big Appanoose County farm that I have, when I first bought that, first thing we did was put 600 tons of lime on.
Wow.
Yeah. Like mega lime, and now we don't have to fight that. Now that's done.
Now you're doing maintenance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we want to plant clover here, we plant clover there. If we want to plant alfalfa, it's all doable because we bit off that big chunk in the beginning. Right. But it's not a fun, like, it's not planting apple trees or whatever somebody wants to do. But
I think I almost kind of want to go back to that because 600 tons of lime. Yep. at call it 2,000-3,000 pounds an acre, I'm guessing is what you're putting it on.
Yeah, well, we put on 3 tons.
Wow.
So 6,000 pounds.
Right.
Yep.
So a couple hundred acres got a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot of lime.
Yep. That's a lot of trips.
And the only thing, and I'm not going to say we did this wrong because I still believe it was the correct thing to do, but we were so early in the process, we hadn't figured out where all our CRP was going to be and where all our crops. So we ended up fertilizing some acres that are in CRP.
Which isn't all bad.
It's not bad because, and again, we're going to go down a different rabbit hole, but one thing that I'm starting to do on a lot of my farms is when we put CRP in is go with mixes that have more forbs. Unless it's an area where that I'm trying to create bedding or I'm trying to create a screen, I will try to do, like if it's I'll try to go with what they call a 40-10 or 30-10 mix. So 40 species, 30 of which are forbs, 10% are grasses because they eat that.
That's food. Yeah.
It's food.
Yep.
And that's where that lime is still helping us.
Absolutely.
Because that, those forbs are sucking up that lime. That's getting right into the deer. So it definitely wasn't a waste, but if you only had a super finite amount of resources, we probably would have planned differently.
Right. No, I get it.
Yep.
I get it. And I do think it's weird because it's been beaten into all of our heads for food plots.
Right.
Get your pH right, pH right. But I think a lot of people don't even think about it when it comes to, establishing native grasses or.
It helps everything.
Everything works better. There's nothing wrong with having the right
everything
pH.
works better.
100%. All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Steve. So back to the backbones. You're looking at, obviously, to your point, if it has timber, and I'd even consider you kind of a timber expert.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why we got, we set ourselves up for the big projects like that so we can do them on our own schedule. That's why we can handle a lot of that ourselves.
Yep.
So,
now, on that note, Steve, and I'm no tree expert by any stretch, but obviously we're pretty blessed up here. You guys are pretty blessed.
Yeah, you have
there.
You have nicer timber up here than we
think?
do. Oh, I know. So just a little bit that I was on when you guys held the.
Sure.
I walked some of those.
You were
farms.
literally on one of the enchanted forests,
right? Probably.
You've
so
seen it, but. I was just going to bring up the fact that, we're blessed in the fact that, if you have a beautiful stand of black walnut, the value's insane.
Yes.
Or damn nice oak stand, or go right down the list.
Right.
But that's what I wanted to ask about, Steve. So early on, obviously, you could walk any piece of ground and identify, heck yeah, you got some timber value, you know, or probably even put an estimate on, board feet or, true value based on the market. With that being said, where's the balancing act, Steve, on, hey, you can cut X amount. We could extract X amount of trees and here's a projected value. How much of that are you taking into the overall habitat plan for the long run? It's one thing to say, hey, we're going to go in and cut some trees and get some money so I can put a culvert or a road system in.
Yep.
But without a little vision, you don't replace 100-year-old oak tree and I guess I'm curious about that on when you fire a chainsaw up, how much of your management plan and habitat improvement goes into that calculation before you're ever taking a tree off the place.
And, usually on that, and again, every landowner is going to have a slightly different need as far as, money, resources that they're willing to contribute in addition to the land and the money that can be made from timber. But normally if we go in, we would take, and this is, it sounds bad, but we'll take the big, best trees that we can, leaving the good, when I say younger trees, the mid-story, and we leave big trees, an 18-inch walnut, that big around, we're not cutting that. No,
so your rule of thumb is going to be over 18 for sure.
But what we do, we also take the good ones because we have to financially. That's what we're trying to do. Then we take all the junk.
Yep, get it gone.
That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest mistake people make. They high grade the good stuff, which is fine because there's a time to cut it. But you have to take the junk.
Yeah.
So then
basically.
We do it. We take the real good and the really junky. Get that out. Then we start applying for, our EQIP money, different government contracts, and we come right back through and TSI that.
And clean it up even
more.
And
even do more of an aggressive TSI. And then there's one step in there that needs to fall early in the process, and that's if you have invasive species.
Yep.
We have a lot of, honeysuckle down by us. Yep. It's terrible.
Buckthorn.
We don't get buckthorn down there.
Oh, you don't know?
No, we had it where I grew up in Illinois, but we don't have it down there.
We have it here.
Oh, do you?
Yep.
Okay, it must like a northern climate. a little more northern than we are. But, so that would be another place where we have to balance, do we open this canopy up right away without treating these invasives, or, you know what I mean? And that's something that a lot of people overlook, and you can make your job a lot harder if you don't deal with it. I've got a real nice stand of white oaks that I actually moved the skidder there, and I was going to cut some, and started noticing how much honeysuckle we had, and then ended up spending last winter we just managed the honeysuckle and didn't cut any of the white oaks.
Yep.
So, and then we're going to go through again late summer, spray what we missed, and then we may start cutting this fall. So
let's I'm going to veer off course again, Steve. You brought up honeysuckle, and I think it's something that basically everyone in Iowa fights. If you're not controlling it, it will take over.
Yep.
And I've actually heard varying opinions on it, and this is kind of where I want to go with it. So yes, it's an invasive.
Yep.
But I've also, and I'm not going to say had arguments, but definitely debates.
Yep.
And one of them was with a very renowned or celebrity hunter. And the comment was we were actually shed hunting his farm. And it was so thick.
Right.
Steve, like you came out of there, you looked like you were in a war, man.
Sure.
Your pants are tore up, you're bleeding.
Yep.
And it wasn't just honeysuckle. I mean, he had a lot of multi-flower rose.
Right.
And I said, dude, you got to, I'm like, you need to get a forestry mulcher in here and just level this. And then when it starts re-sprouting, spray it all. Like you got to kind of start over.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it was that radical in this area of a farm.
That
bad. And he goes, Kurt, I'm not touching it. And I go, what are you talking about? You know, like, what do you mean you're not touching it? And he goes, dude, every deer on this place pours out of there.
Yep. I could see it. I mean, it depends on what else you have for habitat there. But if you have very low quality habitat on the farm in general, that will probably be the best habitat, in which case I don't know that I would clear it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I would maybe at the least I would contain it.
Yeah.
So I would say I would draw an X around or circle around this area and say if there's honeysuckle outside of that, we kill it immediately.
Yep.
Because it spreads bad and it's not good for your neighbors.
Fire.
Now, but what it really depends on is your goal. Like if your only goal is big deer and they like that spot, then leave it alone. My case, why we were fighting it so hard, I really want that regeneration of that white oak stand. Like that's a big part of it, so much so that we're going to leave our best trees for a couple years to try to, after we cut the junk,
get some seed.
Yep, try to get some seed and use the better genetic trees. So we absolutely have to manage that honeysuckle for the next 3 to 5 years aggressively, or it will not allow those oak seedlings to come up.
And I think that's something people don't understand either. I mean, to truly get oak to go,
white oak especially, it's tough.
You need sun.
Yep, you need sunlight to the ground, and you usually got to cut a lot heavier than people think. That's the the almost. If I had a big, and that patch is only like 40 acres, but if I had a big chunk of it, I think I would actually manage it in clear cuts. Yeah. Meaning I would take 5 acres and literally clear cut it, and then let that regenerate and move over, and a couple years later keep working like that.
Yeah, and I mean you're talking start from scratch. I mean,
yes,
when you're saying clear cut, everything
goes, and people hear the word clear cut and they freak out, but inevitably you're leaving those mid-story trees, or you're leaving a lot of shade tolerant trees that as soon as they get a little bit of light, they're going to go nuts.
Yeah, you're going to end up with a maple forest.
Yeah, not down there. We have other ones. Hackberry is like that. Yep. Ironwood is bad for us. We have a lot of elm. Those are all trees that will persist in the mid-story until there's a disruption, and then they go nuts. So you pretty much have to make sure to get those out of there before you do any other management. But getting back to the honeysuckle, it's if that's the cover you have, I wouldn't ruin it, because number one, you're going to be where they're living, so they're going to go live somewhere else, which that's bad. And then
that's a problem.
Yeah, that's really a problem. And then the other thing is, it's difficult to battle. The other way you could kind of mitigate that is by spraying it, where you really weren't removing the structure. You could go in and start spraying it, in the say late July through October into
once
early
it starts
October.
To recess,
you want once it starts pulling towards its roots, and it even would become more effective into October if people are willing to do it in hunting season. But you could do that. You would have the dead bushes there, which would act like cover until they broke down. So then it wouldn't be as dramatic as you show up with a mulcher, and one day it's thick, the next day it's wide open
gone.
except for trees. So I think you'd be doing a disservice to the property by doing that. So
your preferred method for controlling honeysuckle, I mean, are you going and cutting it all, or are you hacking squirt? Like,
the big ones we cut at my place, those ones where the white oaks are, we cut and then sprayed the stumps.
Yeah.
Yep. And then we'll come back, and then when we come back, we'll spray foliar spray, actually spray the tree. And then as we get back later into the winter again, if there's any we missed, we'll actually just do a basal bark spraying where we're spraying, like if this is it, try to spray, a like 2 or 3 inch band all the way around it with Garlon, and that works pretty well.
Yeah.
And just, and then the dilemma I have is everyone's management plan, the foresters I've worked with and stuff, involves fire.
Yep.
Problem I have is what the heck's going to happen to those small white oak seedlings? Mm-hmm. I know they're not going to be fire tolerant right away.
Yep.
So, so figuring out what year can we introduce fire to make sure I don't,
And I've heard varying opinions on that.
I mean, some people say it doesn't hurt, but it seems like a big risk to me because if I get my oak regen, I want to be very careful managing it,
Yeah, because, I mean, I've inadvertently burnt not baby oaks, but I'm talking 6-foot oaks, in a CRP stand. Hell yes,
it killed them. Yep, we've had the same thing. We've let fires run down a few draws, and I'm like, oh my God, it either killed them or it killed them from the ground. Killed the lower limbs off, which probably in the end doesn't hurt anything.
I've heard some stories. Your old buddy Kirby Schultz told me. I mean, he got into some fires that we let run down the valley.
Yep, I'm sure he does. He's done a lot more burning than me. That's funny.
It was a good laugh that night. But, no, I was curious on that because, I mean, I think as a whole, fire through the timber is something that probably doesn't get used enough. But,
Correct.
I mean, I think there is a time and a place. And I've heard it both ways, Steve. I've heard guys, burning the whole understory with the goal that the next year they're really going to get aggressive with, honeysuckle or multiflower rose or any of their invasives.
Right.
Now so they burnt it one year. The next year it was all about invasive control, and then the next year they're coming in heavy with the TSI.
Right. And that probably is the right set of years. The tricky part of that is like I said, we're going to leave our really good high quality trees to act as seed trees for a few years.
Yep.
But we're all, so my theory is as we do that, burning that leaf litter away early in the process is going to let more sunlight to the ground.
Correct.
So doing that in conjunction, but once the saplings, sprout and are small, there's probably going to be a 3 to 5 year period where burning doesn't work for us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, the nice thing about burning is if you set the farm up, and again, it goes back to that talking about figuring out your access roads, putting them around the perimeter, those become fire breaks.
Absolutely.
If you do that right, you can walk it with a leaf blower.
I
can go burn by myself.
Yeah,
on the right day, I can burn by myself. I don't have to have 10 people. And, so once that's another function of just in the beginning, biting the bullet and getting the farm set up properly, because then the rest of these practices become easier. So
no, there's a lot. I mean, that was a mouthful, or you said something that sounds very simple, Steve.
Sure.
But yes, in theory, if everyone had like literally a beat down 8-foot perimeter trail.
Yep. I just always figure a dozer width, 10, 12 foot dozer blade, and just, scrape it back a little bit, get the brush out of the way, and then, make it, if you have to put some culverts in, put them in, just so you have a way to get a 4-wheeler around it. And, and it in our part of Iowa, and you probably have to deal with fences up here too.
Oh, yeah.
Usually we have fence situations, so it's nice to have a way that on a hot August day when we get a 2-inch rain and it blows out a water gap, now you just drive your 4-wheeler down, put some steel posts in. You're not packing, but in the old days we're backpacking stuff down there and everything else.
Whatever it takes.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so let's talk a little deeper on trees. So it's one thing to have natural regeneration because you open the canopy and you already had the seed tree there. Yep. Now he's gone, canopy's open, you're getting your regen.
Yep.
Steve, are you going in? I mean, do you go in and cage X amount of them once you recognize they're there? Like what's your I mean, if you're growing oak trees, it's a pain in the ass.
I'm hoping I don't have to. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm hoping I don't have to cage them. One of the avenues of that is that's why by going in first and knocking out all the junk white oaks, or even in a white oak stand or a black walnut stand, you have a lot of low quality trees.
Absolutely.
But those treetops hopefully will act as our screens.
That kind
you know
of
what I mean?
cage,
Yeah,
right.
that's kind of the cage. Now, if it looks like, hey, this isn't working, then we're gonna have to revisit that. I'm hoping through natural regen we can get enough seedlings on the ground and they fight hard enough for light that they sort of self-select and the ones survive. It is a challenge on high deer density farms.
Yep.
And I would say for our part of Iowa, my farm is not high deer density. It's probably average, which is fine with me. I'd just assume have that.
Right.
So that, there would be some thought to caging either individual species or maybe areas.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you could put, 20 by 20 panels around cattle panels around areas that would discourage the deer and that would help too. But on a forestry scale or a bigger property scale, that becomes pretty ineffective. Yep.
I was just curious because, I mean, it seems, and I'm dealing with some of this on a personal level because I have a CSP contract that I guess this technically is year one.
Right.
But from a practice perspective, it's all going to start, in the spring of next year.
Right.
So, like, as an example, this year, Steve, I'm going to go in the dead of winter and hammer as many invasives as I can get my hands on.
Sure.
I'm just going to kind of go crazy with the honeysuckle. If there's multiflower rose, anything I can affect, I'm going to affect it. And then starting right away, basically the second I can start putting trees in the ground, I'm going to plant, it's about 4,000 trees.
Oh, wow.
So it's a lot, and I'm going to be, same thing. It'll be a mix of hardwoods, but heavy on the oaks for sure. And what was interesting to me is there is they don't recommend really doing anything. I'm just going to put them all on the ground.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to argue, their processes. This comes straight from my forester, but his point is you're going to plant them this year, Kurt.
Right.
And he goes, now next year I want you to go through and aggressively, drop trees, weed trees, potentially log some of them off.
Yep.
And with that, obviously, you're going to be dropping trees
Create
on
some structure.
Trees.
Yep.
But by and large, it should work. And and I'm super concerned, Steve, that I'm going to plant 4,000 little baby hardwoods. Right. And this winter, they're all going to get just shit pounded.
Eaten. Are the species you're planting the same species that are there already?
Yes.
Okay, then I think you'd be all right. Like if you had no white oaks and you put white oaks, they'll hunt them down and eat them. Yeah. I think as long as white oaks are on the ecosystem already, I think you'll be okay because they have that preferred food source. Another thing that might help is to mix in some of that edge feathering or, tree, dropping some trees right away just to give them more browse to eat.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
The easy button.
Yeah, let them eat the the buds on the other stuff. Yeah, put some trees on the ground right away.
That's a great idea.
Or maybe in another part of the farm to distract them from your saplings during their most critical time.
Yeah.
So,
one, I think that's another. This actually was a trick Skip told me, and this is years ago.
Sure.
But he was saying, hey, if you got an area that's got a ton of browse pressure,
right?
He said in the dead of winter. He said, don't give them hay or, supplementally feed them. He said, walk in your timber once every 2 weeks,
and
pick a tree.
Cut down some elm trees or
cut
whatever.
a tree down. And he goes, if you put a camera on it, watch what happens. He goes,
it
they
is
just
crazy.
flock to it.
No, I would agree. That's, that happens to us. We do a lot of CSP or equip type projects where we're doing edge feathering. And it's like, you cut one day and then you get there the next day and there's tracks everywhere walking through your spot. So it's pretty cool.
Well, there's a lot of those little tricks, and
absolutely.
I mean, I know there's a ton of educational stuff out there, and I've watched a ton of it, but I also like in watching it and probably having a little better understanding than an average guy or whatever.
Right, yeah, for sure.
There's a lot of conflicting information.
Yes, I was going to say there's a lot of wrong. Like I can't tell you how many times I'll just click on watch some YouTube thing of a new habitat guy, and I'm like, no, that's not how you do it.
Right, but if you didn't know.
Right, you don't know. You're just going to go to the
credible.
Right,
and,
sure. Or it's just in an environment that's totally different from where it's going to be applied.
100%.
And I'm very careful to, if I think that I know something, I make sure to tell people I know this about a small geographic part of Iowa. I'm not saying I know Western Iowa or up here in Northeast Iowa. And I had a client that flew me. He has some big farms down in our area, and he flew me to he had a big piece of property on the Maine-New Hampshire border.
Oh, wow.
And he wanted my advice, like, he wanted to make that Iowa. And I'm like, it's never going to happen.
Right.
Like, this is just
not like that.
No. And I said, I gave him, I told him you need to up your game as far as how much timber harvesting you're doing, because you have a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be here. But I said, really, I can't speak to the management of this because I don't truly understand it. You know what I mean? So.
Well, and there's a difference between like management and a hunting strategy, right? Like,
right.
Steve, you can go anywhere in the country and tell somebody how to hunt their farm.
Right. Yeah. That would be relatively simple. The long-term management from a forestry health, that's where you'd want to involve a more local professional.
Yeah,
so.
and truly understand that ecosystem.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
But it makes it fun. So
on you'd mentioned clear cuts before, and it's funny because part of my CSP plan, like one of the things they even recommended was, hypothetically to clear cut.
Like forest openings.
And it's hard for me to I get it, and I understand the value of it, but like it would be hard for me to walk down to my timber and see nothing
right,
but
and just see stumps. Yeah,
junk,
it's tough. Yep.
What's your experience with that, Steve? I mean, have you done any direct seedings? And
well, we did a big direct nut seeding for Bill Winke.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny because that was on my old farm, and I drive by it all the time, and it's doing great.
Yeah.
And I was very skeptical of it when we were doing that. Very skeptical compared to bare root seeding, which is how we normally tree plant. But after seeing it done, I was pretty impressed.
Yeah.
So. In that case,
has it been thinned? Have you went back through to thin it?
No. He's since sold the farm. There's been some different owners, so I don't know what their objectives are. I just look at it from the road, you know, and so like, that did work. So that's pretty cool.
Well, I follow Bill's YouTube channel now with his, I think he calls it the Dream Farm series, and he's done a fair amount of direct seeding on that farm
up here. We're going to see that today.
Yeah,
so.
It'll
be fun.
It'll be interesting to get your perspective on it.
For sure.
Sounds like he's having pretty good luck with it.
Yeah, I'll be curious. He will research something to the nth degree. He's a very smart guy, so he's got that engineering kind of mind, and he applies it to whatever habitat stuff he's working on.
Well, I'll go on record and just say, I mean, I know on his podcast he kind of paints the picture that his farm's, nowhere near obviously what he wants it to be.
Sure.
But I think I'd hedge a pretty strong bet in the next 3 to 5 years he's killing.
Yeah, he'll have it dialed in for sure. Yeah. I'm excited to see it. That was all a fun part about this trip. So.
Right. Now, when you're going bare root, sorry, Steve, I'm going to go down all these little rabbit holes with you, but bare root planting, and part of this purely selfish because I'm going to be doing a shit pile of it. And I've done quite a bit in the past, but I've always been the guy. Take a potato spade, stick it in,
make a slot,
kind of wedge it,
stomp it in,
and stomp it, right?
Yep.
And I just had another buddy do a big planting last year, and he actually told me he got in essence, like a little mini auger bit on his Milwaukee drill. And
they work great too.
I'm just curious, what's your opinion on planting bare root stock?
I think I would do if the ground's dry or not wet.
Yeah.
The auger is terrible if it's wet because it puts all that dirt back in there in a big clump, which will then dry and those roots can't penetrate
and
it.
It's almost worse.
Yes,
probably.
It's almost worse for sure. If the ground is dry or loamy, the auger is probably the best way to do it.
Yep.
And then the other thing I would say though is, you almost have to make sure you know what you're getting for bare root stock, because if you have a 3-inch auger and the root balls are this big where you're crowding them into the hole, that's not good. You could actually need a 5 or 6 inch.
I think
auger.
He was running like a 5 or 6.
Okay.
To me, it sounded overkill. Initially,
but that makes sense because you're giving that plant more area for its roots to go. If you're the more you cram it in a little hole, it takes longer for it to break out of its shell.
For sure.
Yep. But that would be the only difference. And most people make the mistake of buying too big of trees. On bare root stock because they think they're bigger, they'll get bigger quicker, and that doesn't always work.
It's actually kind of usually the opposite.
It's the opposite. Yep, they sleep for a while, and then they always say they sleep, creep, leap. That's the progression.
Just like native grass.
Yeah, just like native grass. And when you look at your bare rootstock, if you're shopping, it'll have a number on it, like 2/0, 1/0. That means it's 2 years old and it has not been transplanted.
Ever.
If it's like a 2-1, it was grown in it and then it was transplanted one time. So that's important. I usually, if you're doing them by hand and stuff, I would go with the smaller stuff, 2-year-old at the most.
Yep.
You know what I mean? If, a bare rootstock, that's 12 to 16 inches, you can handle that by hand pretty easy.
For sure.
Yeah. You get those big ones, we have a tree planter that goes behind the tractor for the field type work, and we'll get some, especially dogwoods. They'll have a root ball like
huge,
that, and you're like, oh my gosh, and you end up having to go super slow because you really got to watch the ground open to the right level and put it in, and then have somebody behind you closing everything up.
Babysitting it a little, yeah.
Yep. But Skip will be your guy on trees. He's a very, very knowledgeable tree guy.
He's kind of a tree guru.
He is a guru. He has his own little nurseries and stuff, but he's going to be, he would be a great resource if you have questions.
I'll pick his brain a bunch on it because I'm just curious. And then, so we kind of covered the caging thing.
Yep.
And that's something that to me is almost conflicting, right? So I think my initial tree planting, Steve, was now 15-ish years ago.
Okay.
And that was a mix. It was some in timber.
Okay.
Bare root.
Yep.
And then it was also, I took about 11 acres of CRP and in essence rowed out, row of hardwoods, row of evergreens, and then 2 rows of bushes.
Sure.
Or, bush type.
Shrubs. Yep.
Shrubs, yes. And anyway, all of that said, like, growing deer and trees at the same time, I learned quick.
Right.
We sheltered a pretty good jag of the hardwoods.
Yep.
I don't know as a percentage, but if I said, I know we put 5,800 trees / shrubs in the ground.
Right.
I'll bet I had, I wish I knew the mix. I wish I knew the numbers, but a lot of the hardwoods, we sheltered them.
Okay.
Or tubed them.
Yeah, tubed them. Yep.
And I learned some lessons the hard way, man.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they had recommended using, the bamboo stakes.
Right.
Which, in theory, to me seemed brilliant.
Right.
First year, 50% got snapped off during the rut.
By the bucks, yeah.
Yep. So then I was down there, putting fiberglass poles in, resheltering.
Yep.
And it just got to the point where I'm like, this is insane. Like I'm fighting an uphill battle or pushing a rock
rolling
up the
a rock
hill.
up the hill. Yep.
And now it's got to the point where, and of course now a lot of these trees have a very established root system.
Right.
But because they've been nipped off so many times, you're getting the short, fat look on a lot of them.
Yep.
So the last couple years, I went down in the fall, identified the trees that I can for sure tell.
Right.
And we've actually started caging them.
Sure.
And it's not just, the oak or hardwoods I'm doing it to. I've hand-selected, same thing. I got a lot of pine trees that were part of it.
Yep.
And you cannot grow a white pine here without sheltering it. Fact.
Right, I would think.
Not
yeah,
happening.
they're going to eat that like candy.
They seek that out like crazy.
Yep.
But it is interesting because even since we've been doing the caging things, the growth I'm seeing in one season
is night and day. It's amazing
Dude,
how much those deer eat. It really is.
And I'm about to go and walk every one of them, Steve, with a hand sprayer and just hit like the perimeter with a little Roundup, to knock back the competition. Because every one I've caged, I think it'll be a 2-year progression where the first 2 years, if I intensively manage that, 2 years later, they're going to be tall enough, I'm going to be pulling the cage off.
Right, absolutely.
Like it's just, I'm past the browse line.
Yep. And one thing that works really great for that spraying, like the year after they've been planted, I don't know, it's something called Oust.
Okay.
I don't know if you ever used it, Oust XP, and I'm not sure the actual chemical name.
Yeah.
But it it can be sprayed right over those trees when it's dormant.
When they're dormant, yeah.
And it'll give you almost complete control till about August.
Wow.
It's a post. I mean, it kills anything that's alive, and it also is a pre-emergent, and it's a heavy-duty pre-emergent.
So timing-wise, Steve, when are you?
March. Like for you guys up here, you might get away with it. Basically, if say it's an oak species, until those buds start to break.
Yeah.
When the buds are still closed shut, which down in our area they can break buds open in early March.
Yeah, you guys are always
we're
way ahead.
Yeah, we can be way ahead of you guys. So I would say, if you get some nice days in February, you could spray it then. If for us, February, March, and it works out good.
And ahead of that, what are you looking at, Steve? I mean, is it all I'm going to say kind of a weed grass mat, because of whatever was there in the fall?
Usually we've done a kill of some kind, and so there's, broadleaf weeds, the, dead ones and stuff. Mm-hmm. But what we're really trying to do is keep the grass out of it.
Yep.
For us, grass is the hardest part.
Well, it competes the hardest.
And what you're doing is, by killing that grass, say you kill the grass in a 2-foot circle around that tree, that gives that tree almost unlimited use of whatever water's available. Mm-hmm. The grass itself doesn't kill the trees. The nutrient removal is what kills or stunts them. So, but you can go right over. You don't have to even be accurate. You just kind of spray around it, get it on the tree, whatever you want. And that is one thing we did for Bill with his direct nut seedings. We came in March with a broadcast sprayer, just like a boomless sprayer, and just drove around through it, put down as much of that oust as we could.
It works
really good. It's a very, very powerful chemical. It's like 2 to 3 ounces per acre is a heavy rate.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it will translocate with water. I learned that the hard way. I thought, this would be great. I'll just edge my house with it.
Sure.
Well, then it just bled off and killed the lawn.
I'm sure Stacy appreciated that.
Yeah, that's part of living with funny. Steve.
That's funny. Yeah, I spray all my stuff around the house with Roundup 2-3 times a year. But,
right.
Yeah, I was just curious on that because, like I said, now I think back to the shelter thing.
Right.
The other thing I figured out the hard way is that's like a perfect spot for hornets and wasps
and mice
to build a net, and mice to get in
mice
there.
Actually will girdle some of the trees.
Yep.
Now that oust, the one thing you have to, any softer like shrubs and fruit trees, you got to be very careful. Oust can be hard on them.
Okay.
Yep. You got to really
even in the dormant stage.
Even in the dormants. Yep.
Okay.
The dormant, because some of that stuff, like even your aspen, they're going to take it in through the bark.
Yep.
So they're not like an oak. When it's dormant, it's dormant. You know, you're going to want to be more careful and certainly read the label for any. If you have unique species, make sure it's compatible with that. But we have great use with it down our area. I mean, it's awesome.
Well, that's something I'm going to take away from this for sure, because I may even try that next year.
Yeah, I would.
Into the year.
Yep.
But yeah, I think spraying is another step that a lot of people miss because it's controlling the competition around them makes a hell of a difference.
That's the whole battle.
Right.
So, without a doubt.
So staying on trees, but trying to get through the spider web of Steve Hanson's mind. And if I should say this too, if people aren't following you, Steve, they should. It's Steve Hanson III, like I, right?
Yep, just Steve Hanson III.
Yeah, so. Steve put some awesome stuff up on social media on and funny stuff like you wreck equipment.
People think we wreck stuff just to get likes, and I'm like, no, dude, it doesn't work that way. We do it organically.
Seems like it worked very well for Josh Bomar. Just burn a truck up once a year.
We're not that bad yet, but the day's young.
If you hung out with Kirby more, I bet you'd
we'd probably come up with some more trouble.
Content.
So,
all right, fruit trees is where I want to go, Steve.
Okay.
Your thoughts? I mean, I know everyone conceptually is like, hey, fruit trees should be part of, your management and or hunting strategy for that matter. But talk to me a little bit about introducing fruit trees. Like, what's your game plan with fruit trees in general?
Well, number one, if we take it back to like the management of a property and go start from that level, it would be the very last thing we would do.
Okay.
Yep. It's what I consider a micro project. You got to get everything else fixed. And it basically, it's because it's going to suck up so much of the resource of time.
Oh, yeah.
They are very finicky. Now, you guys, it's just funny sitting here because this is Iowa, but up here, your climate is much better for them. You don't tend to get those deep, hot drought. You know what I mean? You'll get dry weather, but you don't get the deep heat like we do. I mean, we really, all tree plantings are subject to drought, but apple trees, pear trees are definitely less drought tolerant than other ones. And whenever we talk to somebody about, planting them, usually they right away want to do 100, and I say, let's do 50 and do them right.
Yep.
Because there's a lot of steps involved, from obviously selecting the site. And that's the other thing. That's the one thing I'd say I don't like about an apple tree planting from a kill plot type idea, which everybody wants. You have to pick a spot that's really specific that's going to help them. Usually we want to plant them on a hill. We want them well drained. The other reason for a hill is you want that cold air. Like when you get those odd, like late April frosts, you don't want to be in the bottom down low somewhere where that frost is going to settle and get your buds off your trees. And then you do have to plant them in blocks. You don't want to plant like a long line of apple trees that just goes along the edge of a woods, and you don't want them under the drip line of any other trees.
Yep.
They've got to be out in the open. And then, critical in our area for success, you're going to, you plant them. And we buy decent sized trees. They're usually 5 to 6 feet tall. I think they call them 1 inch caliper, or maybe 1.5 inches. So they're, they're about that big around.
Decent size.
Yeah. And then, we plant them, water them right away, and we will water those. That's what I was saying about a project when everything else is on board, all the clover's planted, all the hard work is done. That's when you would take on the challenge of an apple tree orchard.
I like how you say it, the challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, it really is. But one of the things we learned, we have a lot of rabbits. Mm-hmm. So even if you cage the tree, we still get small rabbits and mice that'll get in there and girdle the base of the tree. Yep. So we started using window screen and simply wrapping it around and taking it like a regular office stapler, staple gun it so you have that little piece of screen around the bottom, then the big screen around the top, and then either using wood mulch or even better yet is gravel around the base. Gravel doesn't seem too conducive to other pests living in it. Like everything likes to live under the wood chips.
Oh, for sure.
But we would use like just get a truckload of roadstone and shovel in and put that around it to act as a weed suppressant, and it also keeps everything else away.
That's interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah,
one.
So that works pretty good. And then the other thing is really learning and understanding once you get them going when they need to be sprayed, because to really get the most out of them, they have to be dormant sprayed. And it's a little bit of a process, And the other thing is, I wouldn't recommend them and put them in the most remote spot on your farm because they need so much maintenance. You're going to be in and out of there a lot, And that would be the other thing I would always caution people to, hey, try to keep these over here. So it's they're pretty cool, and we've had some farms that have some awesome one, but the other thing is you got to go into it like just have it in the back of your head that if we plant 100, we might 5 years from now have 40 or 50.
Right.
They're, you're going to lose quite a few.
They're picky buggers.
They're very picky, and don't, if somebody, just know that going in. Some people think, oh, I planted 100, I want 100. Well, you're going to have to replant and stuff like that.
Keep working at it.
We have another thing that's a challenge for cedar or is our apple trees is cedar apple rust.
Yep.
So that's something else you have to know what that is, watch for it, spray for it if needed. And it's definitely not a plan it and forget it type endeavor.
Right.
So.
Or you got damn lucky, one or the other.
Right, you might get lucky.
Right.
And I know, other places I go, there's old homesteads and there's old apple trees. Like that is very unusual down in our part of the country. Very, very unusual.
And it's pretty common here. I mean, like,
right.
I think, I can't think of a single farm that I'm on that doesn't have natural occurring apple trees.
Yeah.
And just the pruning of those when they're dormant makes a heck of a difference on getting them revitalized.
Yeah, because they will. They'll eventually crowd themselves out when they're not producing apples, and there's books and books, or you could go and
endless.
Yep, and that I would say of all the projects and all the things that we do on a daily basis, from native grasses, timber harvesting, any TSI, any of that stuff, I would say I'm the least knowledgeable on apple trees of any of that, of fruit trees.
Sure.
I would say that would be my weak point, and I had so many failures early doing it that I kind of was like,
It just pisses you off.
Yeah, it does, and it is expensive. They're expensive trees, and it's really cool if someone wants to take that on. It's just that's a serious commitment,
Well, I'm going to pick Skip's brain.
That's what I would do, and he will tell you which ones will do better, and he knows all the species, and and then there's a whole nother science to it because a lot of them have one rootstock, and then the tree's been actually grafted to it, and there's a whole thing about that. So I'll be curious. There's a lot to it, but it is cool to have. We sold a farm that we'd managed for a long time, and we had a beautiful orchard on that place, and it was really cool, and actually. It was one of the things I think that sold that farm because the guy went, I can't, this gives me a 10-year head start. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is established and going, and, So that's pretty cool. So
one, you talk about wanting to take an inventory of deer.
Yes, yeah, you got that October.
Holy moly!
Yep. Yeah, no, there's a time where that's the only game in town.
Yeah.
That's one thing you can have on your property that no one else will have, especially in our area.
I try to even keep track. It seems like at least with the wild apple trees, like you may get apples every year.
Right.
And this is observation only. There's no science behind this, but like it does seem like it's an every other year thing where.
And that could be the moisture. You could be using up more. You know what I mean?
There's something to it because it seems like the super heavy apple year, the next year you may still have some apples. I'm not saying it's like, nothing.
Sure.
But it seems way lesser, and then the next year it springs right back. Well, where I'm going with this, Steve, is I attempt to keep track of that.
Okay.
On, when does it start dropping?
Right.
And most of the time it's because I want to move a camera there and use that as an inventory thing. But you want to talk about getting a big buck on his feet in daylight hours.
Right.
There's nothing that'll do it faster than an apple tree.
No, especially during that window in October, that kind of pre-rut window. That's perfect timing for that. It really is. It's that is pretty cool. I wish we had more of them there. And one thing you guys can do, and we find pear trees in the timber a lot.
Yep.
But if you just like find some of these, volunteer ones or old remnant ones from a previous orchard, is just cut the trees around them, give them full sunlight.
Yeah, open it up.
That's the simplest thing you can do to help that tree. You know what I mean?
The rule of thumb I've always heard too, Steve, is however tall the tree is, if you were to lay it down and literally walk a circle, that's the area you need to clear to open it up. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I would clear it to the point where it had full sunlight on all sides.
No matter what.
No matter what. Yep. That would be my goal, because that's what's going to let that tree produce the most fruit and stuff like that. And then the next step could be pruning, could be spraying, but at least if it has sunlight, it has a chance.
Yep. All right, off that subject, Steve. Since you self-admittedly don't.
Yeah,
feel
that's not my. Yeah, that I certainly am all about learning about it, but I'm not one to teach it.
Right. What's your opinion, Steve, on? I'm going to go down the giant miscanthus path with you a little bit, because same thing. Like, we're very familiar. I've done actually a fair amount of it. Almost all with the intentions of creating screen.
Yep.
And I'm not just saying screen for us to get in and out. We've even used it, literally to create a barrier in a food plot where, now a big buck can't see all the way across or whatever.
It'd be ideal for that.
And I just know, I'm part of I don't know how many forums I follow, on, native habitat stuff.
Sure.
And some people are very, very, very opposed to bringing giant miscanthus basically anywhere.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just curious on your thoughts relative to.
Yeah. Normally I would be, against the invasives, but one thing about miscanthus is it's very easy to kill.
Yeah.
I don't worry about it getting away. And the reason I know that is because some of the farms where we have tenants, they'll inadvertently spray it, or I had them drive a 30-foot vertical tillage tool right through mine this year, and it really set it back to the point that I'm like, oh man, I don't know if we'll have to replant this or if this stuff will come back on its own. So I don't worry about the invasive side of it, because I do, it's still susceptible to Roundup. I think if I had an established switchgrass and miscanthus, it'd be much harder to kill the established switchgrass than it would be the miscanthus. So I don't worry about that side of it at all.
Fair enough.
Yep.
One, I know there's obviously claim that supposedly the species we're getting our hands on, it can't even, like it doesn't, whatever.
Yeah, it can spread by its roots, but it can't spread like by seed where it's going to travel.
It's basically going to get bushier.
Yes, and it's going to travel. It's going to spread in the area where you've put it, but it's not going to blow across the highway,
relocate, or whatever.
Right,
the
not
term
at all.
Is. Yeah.
So.
All right. So I'm a miscanthus fan.
Yep, I am too, and we do quite a bit of it, and I did this year as well. So I'm excited, and like my last year's stuff that I planted last year's over my head this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's looking great.
And by year 3, it's outstanding.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
that's when you really, really, really have it, and we've kind of come up with. It's once you learn how to do it, it's very simple to manage.
Yep.
The real game changer for it, just in the establishment year, is quinclorac.
Okay.
Using that to knock out all the other grasses that are trying to compete with that spot.
Out,
Yep. And we mix. We're allowed to use atrazine because we're have a certified herbicide license
Sure.
thing. So we use atrazine and that quinclorac. And then if there's any broadleaf weeds, just a little bit of 2,4-D, and it knocks everything out. And it does not like competition.
No.
The simplest thing to tell somebody if they want to learn, treat miscanthus like corn.
Yep.
If you treat it like corn, put it on good soils, it does not grow under the shade of trees.
And I've learned it doesn't. It really doesn't like wet feet. Like
yeah,
if you
not
put it
super
in a wet area.
Yeah,
It doesn't like
yep.
it.
I would say you're correct on that. So
that's cool. On and this is going to sound simple, but I'm just curious,
Sure.
Steve. So I don't think people understand. Planting giant miscanthus. I mean, you are literally dropping a little rhizome.
Yep.
In the dirt, every 18 inches, and you're kind of creating a grid.
Sure.
If you're really trying to have a screen. So you may be doing that for 5 rows deep.
Yep.
And there's literally a plug going in every 18 inches.
Yep.
How do you preferred method on planting miscanthus?
Now, the one that I have that I was just talking about that's over my head last year, we picked up that miscanthus, and one of the key things with it is whoever you're getting it from, or if you're make sure it stays cold.
Yep.
Until you're ready to plant it. You want it in dormancy, so that stored in a walk-in cooler. Ours had not been stored quite properly, so it had snapped out of dormancy. So it had little green shoots already.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So our original plan last year was to plant it with our tree planter. So we would take our rototiller, spray everything off dead, take the from the year before.
Yep.
Take our rototiller, till deep, 6 inches deep, then come behind that with a tree planter, because that thing's making a nice trench.
Yep.
You just literally sit on it 1, 2.
So you're doing it the same way you'd roll plant trees.
Yes. Yep. We would do it just like that. Last year, when we noticed that a lot of these had snapped out of dormancy, we ended up doing just what I said, rototilling it, but then taking like a hoe, a hand, like a garden hoe, and making a hole, dropping it in, because we wanted that sprout going up.
At least go in the right direction.
Yes, go in the right direction. Otherwise, that one has to die and another one has to start. And, we actually ended up planting them by hand because they were out of dormancy. Yeah, it was a lot more work, This year, we did about 5,000 this spring on a new project, and those we put in with those we used the tree planter, and they were fine. So they were just the roots. And, the other thing with miscanthus is we were given some advice to break up the roots pretty small to get more plants, and I'm not sure that's the right approach. I would break, if they're real big, I'd break them just so they plant right, but you don't want to take a root that's as big as a tennis ball and make 6 pieces out of it. I'd make 1 or 2, something that's plantable. But so that's been good. I mean, I know some of the stuff that we planted this year is already 2 feet tall, and then some of it's just poking out of the ground. So you get the first year, you really kind of just got to hold your breath and hope it's working.
Right.
So,
my experience is it's not super picky. I mean, whether you get one in the ground at 2 inches or 4
no,
inches,
it just takes it longer to grow.
Yeah.
But they will grow. Yep.
Interesting. No, I was just curious because I've seen a lot of different videos on guys planting it, how you plant it, and last year we had a big project in northern Missouri. We actually had a just a walk behind trencher. Yeah. And it was just, carving in a little 3-inch trench.
That's a good way to do it.
And we went the whole way, had it flagged, and did 5 trenches, and then just walked by, threw them in, and then back drug the whole
drug
thing.
the dirt in, and
Shit,
good to
slicker
go.
And snot.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw someone on Instagram doing that with the trencher, and I thought, that's pretty slick. I never would have thought of that.
I mean, it was a fast way to do it.
Yeah. And, I'm a big fan of miscanthus, number one for screens and stuff, but even on some of this, is getting back to what we're talking about with the, managing the farm and stuff, even just out in the CRP fields is just, I probably can't tell FSA this, that you're doing this, but we just do like about a 20-foot in 2 direction, like a boomerang shape.
Yep.
And all that does is give those deer structure to bed up against.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And they will,
it's no different than a cedar tree.
Exactly, in the middle of its field. We just, do that. And when you burn the CRP field, you burn it with it. It's, it's not anything you have to work around once it's established. But we've created some really cool structure within a CRP field.
That's a good idea.
And, it works really well. And it's fast, 2 years and you got it.
And I feel like it's just a control thing. Because, I mean, you talk about guys, they'll go out and put pockets of switch.
Right.
Within a field to get the same effect. Problem is, over time, switch will take over.
Right. Yeah, switch will keep growing into the field. And I still think that the miscanthus has a little bit more of that almost like woody kind of hard wall feel than switchgrass does.
And it just gets plumb taller.
It does. Yeah, and after a couple of years, the leftover stems are almost like bamboo. Yep. So, it does create a nice permanent windbreak.
Sure. Well, Steve, we're getting long-winded.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm going to leave you on.
Okay.
If you had to give one tip, and I don't care if they're an existing landowner, a new landowner, whatever,
right?
From your perspective, the most important thing they're going to do from a management perspective on their farm for hunting?
Probably the best thing is focus on access. And even if it's access that you can't change, like if these are your access points, screen them with Mycanthus.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Screen them with switchgrass. Really build out the access. Think about how you're getting in and out of the farm as much as where you're going.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And once you do that and identify those places, everything else gets easier.
Fair enough. Good
tip.
Good tip. Well, thanks for coming up, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
So we'll do it again.
Yeah, we'll go see what Bill Winke has to say today.
Go see what Bill has to say.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll learn something.
I hope so.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve.
Hey, thank you, man.
Take care.
Yep.